Oldtown was a venerable labyrinth of a city, all wines and crisscrossing alleys and narrow crook-back streets. The thoughts of Pate, A Feast for Crows, Prologue. As we well know, despite the way history makes it seem, Aegon's conquest officially started in 2 BC and ended with his second coronation in Oldtown 2 years later. That means Aegon was fighting the wars of conquest for the better part of 2 years. When you were told of the conquest, it very much comes across as happening much quicker, a few weeks to months maybe. But when you factor in the sheer size of the task Aegon faced and the size of the kingdom he was forging, it's not surprising it took 2 years when you factor in simple things like the time marching between battles, consolidating his rule, and rallying his ever-growing army and fostering stability. Still, for the size of the task Aegon and his sisters accomplished, 2 years is a historical heartbeat. But first, before he could be crowned for the second time, Aegon had one last task to complete: the capture of Oldtown, then the largest and most important city in Westeros, home to the ancient House Hightower, one of the oldest and richest families in Westeros. Oldtown was ringed with massive walls and was not just home to the Hightower, but was also the centre of the faith in Westeros, the home of the High Septon himself, the father of the faithful, the voice of the gods on earth, who commanded the obedience of millions of devout throughout the realms, save the north, where the old gods still held sway over the people. The city was also home to the Blades of the Faith militant, the fighting order of the small folk, called the Stars and Swords. And finally, it was also the home of the Maesters and the ancient Sanctuary of Knowledge, known as the Citadel. Oldtown, in many ways, was the centre of culture in Westeros. The Hightowers are an ancient family, very rich and very proud. Jorah Mormont to Daenerys Targaryen. A Clash of Kings, Chapter 12, Daenerys 1. Between the might of House Hightower, the sheer devotion of the faith militant, and the brilliant minds of the Maesters, if there were to be a siege, a battle for Oldtown, it would surely take a long time and would be bloody, dragons or not. Yet to his surprise, when Aegon Targaryen and his host approached Oldtown, they found the city gates open and Lord Manfred Hightower waiting to make his submission willingly. As it happened, when word of Aegon's landing on the waters of the Blackwater Rush first reached Oldtown, the High Septon had locked himself within the starry sept for 7 days and 7 nights, seeking the guidance of the gods. He took no nourishment but bread and water, and spent all his waking hours in prayer, moving from one altar to the next, seeking help and answers. On the 7th day, the crone had lifted up her golden lamp to show him the path ahead. If Oldtown took up arms against Aegon and the dragons, the High Septon saw the city would surely be burned, and the Hightower and the Citadel and the very starry sept would be cast down and destroyed. Or, at the very least, this is what the stories claim. Could something like this have happened? Yes. Can we say for any certainty that it did? Unfortunately not. But the High Septon still did not have the power to force Lord Manfred Hightower to open his gates and submit to the Dragon Lord. Luckily for the faith, Lord Manfred was a cautious lord, very godly, and a God-fearing man. One of his younger sons served within the Warrior's Sons, and another had only recently taken his vows as a Septon. When the High Septon told him of his vision, Lord Hightower was determined he would not oppose the Conqueror by force of arms. This goes a long way into explaining why no men of Oldtown burned on the field of fire, though the Hightowers were bannermen to the gardeners of Highgarden for thousands of years. And thus it was Lord Manfred who rode up to greet Aegon as he approached, and offer up his sword, his city, his oath. Some say Lord Hightower also offered the hand of his youngest daughter, which Aegon politely declined. From where it stood atop the bluffs of Battle Isle, its shadow cut the city like a sword. The thoughts of Pate, on the Hightower, A Feast for Crows, Prologue. While staying in Oldtown, It's believed that Aegon stayed within the ancient Hightower itself, in Lord Manfred's own apartments at the top of the tower. After 3 days in Oldtown in the majestic Starry Sept, His High Holiness the High Septon himself anointed Aegon with 7 oils, placed a new crown upon his head, and proclaimed him Aegon of House Targaryen, the first of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. While the 7 Kingdoms was used as a style, Dorne had not yet submitted, nor would it for more than a century to come. Only a handful of lords had been present for Aegon's first coronation at the mouth of the Blackwater in the Aegon Fort almost 2 years prior. But now, hundreds from across the 7 Kingdoms were on hand to witness his second, and tens of thousands cheered him afterwards in the streets of Oldtown as he rode through the city on Balerion the Blackdread's back. Amongst those at Aegon's second coronation were the Maesters and Archmaesters of the Citadel. It is speculated it may be for this reason alone it was this coronation, rather than the Aegon Fort crowning on the day of his landing, that became fixed as the start of Aegon's reign. We have no word as to if Aegon's sisters, Queen Visenya and Rhaenys, were present at the second coronation, but many do assume that at the very least Rhaenys was, given Dorne's proximity to Oldtown, with it not being impossible for Visenya to also make the trip on Dragonback from the Vale, depending on how events sit in the very vague timeline. Thus, the 7 Kingdoms of Westeros were hammered into one great unified realm by the will of Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters. Many thought that King Aegon would make Oldtown his royal seat after the war was done, while others thought he would rule from the ancestral Targaryen seat of Dragonstone. The king surprised them all by proclaiming his intent to make his court in the new town already rising upon the 3 hills at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, where he and his sisters had first stepped foot on the soils of Westeros, as legends like to claim. King's Landing, the new town would be called. From then on, Aegon Targaryen would rule his realm, holding his court from a great metal seat made from the melted, twisted, beaten and broken blades of all of his foes, a perilous seat that would soon be known throughout the world as the Iron Throne of Westeros. I think there is a lot more to Aegon's time in Oldtown that meets the eye, and I think his time there may have intentionally been left vague by the Citadel for a very simple reason. Now, if you recall, one of the first videos I made in this recent Aegon's Conquest series is the idea that Visenya, Rhaenys and Aegon spent much more time in Westeros before the conquest than we really know. We know they did spend some time in Oldtown and some other select places, but I believe there's much more to it than that. I've always thought that part of these pre-conquest trips was scouting the kingdoms, but also negotiating and meeting with some of the local lords. I suspect this is what happened in Oldtown. The story concocted about the High Septon's visions might have been a cover for the fact House Hightower, a house who is perhaps the largest and most important of the Garden of King's bannermen, would not take part in the defence of the Reach when the time came, and surrender Oldtown to Aegon. That's why his capture of Oldtown was so simple and straightforward. I also suspect Aegon would have met with the High Septon during his pre-conquest trip, and that during this meeting he advised Aegon that if he was going to unite Westeros under his rule, converting to the faith of the 7 would make him much less foreign and more like one of the local lords, which in turn might explain the sudden conversion of House Targaryen to the faith. I do have a few issues with this idea, however. My main one being that most fans find it surprising that after the downfall of the Garden of Kings, Aegon chose to raise up House Tyrell as Lords Paramount of the Reach, and not the Hightowers, who were kind of the next obvious choice to follow the Gardeners. After all, they controlled Oldtown, the largest city in Westeros. They were much richer than the Tyrells at this time, had a large army, and were kings in their own right for thousands of years before bending the knee to the Gardeners. I do find it hard to believe the Hightowers would agree to back Aegon prior to the conquest, and also be happy for another house to be raised above them. Maybe they simply didn't want power and were happy with the current position. But then, what could Aegon really offer them in this case? So I'm 50-50 with this idea. A compromise between the two is Aegon did meet with the Hightowers in Oldtown, but no agreement was made. When the Hightowers saw the power of the dragons after the Field of Fire, they knew the consequences for themselves if Oldtown did not submit.